Hello everyone, and welcome to this video on ASVR Worldbuilding. If you've watched any of my earlier videos, and you follow them to the letter, instruction for instruction, you invariably will reach a point where you run into stale information. Some of the stuff in those old videos just isn't relevant anymore because of updates that AltSpace has undergone. Late last year, there was a big one that required all templates and kit items to be updated and recompiled and re-uploaded. It was a pretty big deal. A lot of the information in those old videos, however, is still true. So the way that you create a world on the AltSpace website, the way that you work with kit items using the in-game world building tools, all of that stuff is still relevant. So those videos still serve that purpose in terms of that information. So what I'm going to be talking about with this video is just the stuff that's new. There's an updated version of Unity that has to be downloaded. So you want to make sure that you're working on the right version of Unity. And then Unity is now using, or AltSpace is now using the universal render pipeline, the URP. So the way you create a project has now changed significantly. The way a project looks, the way materials work, URP brings in a whole host of changes. And then the Unity uploader itself from AltSpace has undergone a significant revision. The way that you get it, the way that you install it, the way it works, all that stuff has been updated. And so that's what we're going to cover in this video: is how do we work with the new version? What versions of everything should we be working with? And I'm going to wrap it up by showing you how to take an old project from the previous version of AltSpace, and how do I update that to URP and update it on AltSpace. So to begin with, the version of Unity that we're working with is 2020.3. And you can get that through Unity Hub. So here I have Unity Hub, and if I look at it installs and I go to install editor, I see that it'll offer me 2020.3.27F1. Now, the numbers at the end of this, the numbers after the 2020.3 don't really matter as much as this LTS. You want to be looking for something that has LTS on it. It says long-term support, and that's going to be a stable, reliable version of Unity if it has LTS. Now, you can look at this, you can see that I'm still using 2020.3.9. I haven't updated my version of Unity since AltSpace made the transition over to 2020.3. I know a lot of people that have, I know a lot of people that are using later versions, and it doesn't really seem to make a difference. You just want to make sure that you get a version that has this LTS with it. So the one that it recommends is probably going to work for you. If, however, you want to look for an earlier version, or maybe you want to roll back to 2020.9 or one of the other LTSs, you can go to their download archive, and that'll open up a web page where you can specifically select the version of Unity that you want. Now, the biggest differences in the way things work involve the universal render pipeline. Universal render pipeline is going to make all of the material definitions different. It's going to make lighting work differently. It's going to make some things it may break for you. Your mileage may vary on what transitioning over to URP does for your worlds. URP runs on Pabst Blue Ribbon. No, that's physically based rendering. In a nutshell, physically based rendering, PBR, instead of just looking at light as it comes from a light source and bounces off an object and goes to the camera, which is the old way of doing things, now material reflections and the final material effects takes into account the color of the light that's coming from all around an object, not just directly from the light sources. So you wind up with much more realistic shading across your objects and much more realistic reflections if you do the reflections right. What the effect that this could have, especially on the Android side of things, is that you'll see a sparkly effect on certain materials that isn't supposed to be there. Trees aren't supposed to sparkle. Rocks aren't supposed to sparkle. And I see this all over my world. So what's going on, and we'll talk about this more in a little bit. What's going on is you don't have reflection probes covering enough of the geometry, or the reflection probes are in the wrong spot. So one of the side effects of switching over to PBR is that reflection probes now become a lot more important in the way that your world looks as a final result. Another thing is that we now have shader graph that we can use, which is a really good thing. It sort of expands accessibility so that people can create their custom shaders. And if it works in shader graph, you know it's going to work in AltSpace. It's a nice thing. It's a complicated subject too, so I'm not going to go into shader graph in this video, but that might be a good one for the future. So the steps basically involved in converting a project over to URP. The first thing you want to do is you want to back up your project, because there's no coming back from this. Once you, especially if you built the project in 2019, Unity 2019, once you go to 2020, that's crossing something that can't be undone, right? So back up your project in case you haven't. Open it up in 2020.3, and it'll warn you about opening it up in a different version. Go ahead, yeah. And then you'll use the package manager to add the new uploader and the universal render pipeline. Then we'll have to do a couple of things, create a little asset, and then we'll have to deal with the materials. So let's take a look at that process. Here I have a project that I did for the university that I work at. It's a building tour of one of our nice little science facilities, and I've got all these 3D spheres right here. And the spheres are sized just so that if an avatar stands in the center of it, then their eyes are right at the center of the sphere, and you get a nice little effect. This is our clean room. And here is our laser optics lab. Big scary lasers in here. Burn out your eyes, don't look at them. So my goal today is to take this project, and I've already converted it over to 2020.3. So it was originally done in 2019. And here is an old version. This is the original version of the AltSpace uploader. It's actually gone through several different revisions since this. That's how old this project is. And we'll not be looking at that anymore. So now I've backed up my project. I've got it in 2020.3. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to nuke the old AltSpace uploader. I want to delete that AltSpace folder under my assets. And there's a bunch of stuff under plugins that I can safely get rid of. All right, so the old uploader is out of here. I'm going to go up to Window, go down to Package Manager, and this will bring up my, show me the packages that are currently installed. Now this project only has the stuff for AltSpace, or the stuff that I needed for the AltSpace template in it. So it doesn't have a whole lot of stuff, and you want this list to be really short. But the first thing I need to do is get the new uploader. So to get the new uploader, there's a bunch of different places that you can get it. Probably the easiest way to find your way back to the link, if you've not gotten to the link, is to open up the page on any of your templates, and you'll see a link to the Unity Uploader page here. And it's actually a link to the official AltSpace guide. And then down in here is a link to the latest Unity uploader. and it's going to download a file with a TGZ extension. And it also downloads the latest version of it. So I can see right here that it downloaded com.microsoft.altspace.vr_uploader 2.2.26, which is the most recent version of it. Just hang on to this file. That's all you need to do with it. We'll be using it later, but you don't have to open this archive or anything. Just leave it where you got it. So after we have that downloaded, we come back over here to Unity. Come back over to the package manager. And I changed this to add package from tarball. So I don't want package from disk or from a git URL. I want specifically package from tarball. This also will be the only time that we have to do this for this project. Go over to where I have quite a collection, all these different versions. And if this is the only one you've got, this is the one that we'll work with. It's the latest one. And click open and go through its process of adding that package. And we're back. So the AltSpace VR uploader has been added as a package to our project. The next thing that we're going to be looking for is we want to go up here and we want to change packages and project to the Unity registry. And then what we want to do is we want to make sure that the universal render pipeline. So it looks like installing the AltSpace uploader made this change to us for the universal render pipeline, because universal render pipeline has been installed, as well as shader graph. So installing the AltSpace package, the AltSpace, so we have the universal render pipeline installed as a package. We're still not using it yet. You're not there yet. And we have the AltSpace uploader. So I can see the AltSpace VR has that been added as a menu item. So that's very reassuring. One thing that we're going to have to do now is just anywhere in your assets folder. Could be in the root. We'll only have to do this once. We want to go to create, create rendering, universal render pipeline, pipeline asset forward rendering. And since we only have the one of them, and we'll probably only use the one of them, I'll just give it the default name. And then go up to edit and project settings. And under graphics, we'll see a section for scriptable rendering pipeline settings. And by default, it's set to none. Click on that little target button right there. And the only thing on the list should be the asset that we just created. And that works. And then you'll see all these options. Don't bother about any of these options because they could all be overwritten by AltSpace. This is what we want. In fact, at this point, everything should turn this Pepto-Bismol pink. That's exactly what we should see. And probably sometimes you get an error message about the skybox material, but that seems to be working fine. Okay, so the reason everything turns pink like this is because all of your materials still have the material definition for the old rendering system. And now the rendering system is expecting a new type of shader, and that's not available to it. So the first thing that we're going to do, and 9 times out of 10, this takes care of everything. Go to edit, go down to render pipeline, universal render pipeline, upgrade project materials to universal render pipeline materials. And it's going to say, are you sure? And I'm going to say yes. And then it's going to go through this process. And now I got almost everything back. Some of the stuff is still pink, right? So my photospheres came in. The material that I had on these pads, the material that I had on these, still didn't work. And if I look into my materials folder, they should almost all be good. Now, what's causing this on like the light and the ground there might actually fix itself if I just reopen the project. Let's see, it's working on this one. It's working on this one. So I think the material definitions are being used from within the FBX, and upgrading the project materials can't change the material definitions inside the file, the FBX file. So if I look at this mesh object, I see that the material is no name. It actually has a no name material on it, which is the name of the material that probably came out of the modeling package I used for this. So sometimes it's a pretty simple process of going back and sort of assigning new materials to these things. And you may want to go all over your world and make sure you don't look for any pink that's standing out. But it looks like I pretty much got it all in this one. Okay, so my materials have been updated. I've got the new rendering pipeline. I noticed that my shading, my baked lighting looks a bit off now. So I'm going to want to rebake the lighting. The oh, change some of these settings. See if I can get that light map size down. So I'm going to rebake the lighting on this thing and see what that does. All right, we're back. So I've got some shading in here, but it doesn't look like the nice red glows that I had coming off of this really retained itself. And that's one of the big differences between URP and the legacy rendering. I find that on a lot of my lights, the intensity needs to be cranked up. That the default intensity that you probably have left over, especially if you had like emissive materials, like this light emitting red material, that the intensity that you had before probably was not going to be enough. Really need to crank that up. Same thing like on this emissive white material that I've got here. Let's really crank that up. And let's try this lighting again. That's giving me a little more of the look I'm looking for. All right, so let's get this thing online. Here's the actual web page for the original template for this world. And if I look at the top, any reference to this is going to have this NA, which is going to tell me that it's not going to work with the new version, right? So the template is online still, but it doesn't support anything that Altspace currently has. I can look back and I can see that the previous versions were done in 2019, and I had a PC and an Android version over a year ago. But all of these checks to see if it's compliant, fail, fail, fail. Okay. So let's go back over here, go over to templates. We'll bring up the templates menu. So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to check to see that you've got the latest version, and this is the latest version, for better or worse. There's your password. And you can sign in with your Altspace password or your Microsoft account. Either one works. They're both linked together. So we've got a little bit of a different user interface here. The simplest way is just to select a template and then select the Unity file that you want to use. And then you've got some options down here for which platforms you want to build for and whether or not you want it to auto manage the layers. Now, this is the reverse of the way that it used to work. By default, it would automatically move everything to the nav mesh layer, and you'd be able to teleport onto anything flat enough that's got a collider on it. If you leave it checked like this, then it's up to you as to where people can teleport and where they can't. You have to move your objects explicitly to the nav mesh layer if you want to be able to teleport onto something. I leave it unchecked because where people can teleport and where they can't, that's a design consideration in my worlds. So I like that the default now is for me to have the control over it. You have options to build for Windows, Android, and Macintosh. Test build will create a